Hello students, welcome back to studies. In this video, we will discuss the format of cost sheet. But before that, let us quickly look into the elements of cost. Materials, labor and expenses forms the elements of cost. Now, material can either be direct materials or indirect materials. Labor can be direct labor or indirect labor, and expenses can be direct expenses or indirect expenses. Now, direct labor and direct expenses together will form the prime cost, which we will look when we look into the format of the cost sheet. Indirect materials can be factory related or office related, or it can be selling and distribution related materials. When it comes to labor, it can be the indirect labor can be related to the factory or the office or the selling and distribution. And when it comes to indirect expenses, again, this can be either factory related expenses, office related expenses, or selling and distribution related expenses. Now, the same thing we can look into from a different angle. So, another way of classifying elements of cost are it is one and the same, but the way in which it is put is quite different. We have direct materials, direct labor, and direct expenses, and we have overheads. Now, the other word for overheads is indirect expenses. So, when we say indirect expenses, it can be factory overheads, office overheads, selling and distribution overheads, indirect materials, indirect labor, and indirect expenses. Okay, so these are the elements of cost, and all these elements of cost are present in the cost sheet. So let us quickly look into the cost sheet format. Cost sheet can also be called as cost statement. Okay, so here you write the name of the organization, ABC Company Limited, okay, or whatever it is. And for the period, you have to mention the duration, or it can be for the year ended. Okay, and then we need to write the number of units produced during the year. So let us say 1000 units or whatever the case may be. Okay, so this is the heading part of it. And then the cost sheet is divided into three columns. You have the particulars column, total cost, and the unit cost. Now, what is a cost sheet? It is a statement which shows the detailed cost of the total production for a given period of time. Okay, so it provides information on cost per unit at different stages of completion of the product. We need to keep in mind it is an operating statement and it can be prepared either weekly or monthly or quarterly or half yearly or yearly as per the requirements of the management. Okay, it does not form part of the double entry system. So the first part of the cost sheet has direct materials, direct wages, and direct expenses. When you add all these three items, you get the prime cost. So prime cost is made up of direct materials, direct wages, and direct expenses. To the prime cost, if you add factory overheads and then account for the opening and closing work in progress, you get the factory cost, or it is also called as works cost. Okay, so prime cost, add factory overheads, add opening work in progress, less closing work in progress, you get factory cost or works cost. To this factory cost, you add office related expenses, indirect expenses, that is office and administration overheads, you get total cost of production. I repeat, if you add direct materials, direct wages, and direct expenses, you get prime cost. To that, you add all the factory related indirect expenses, and then you add opening work in progress and deduct closing work in progress, you will get factory cost. To this factory cost, add all the office and administration expenses, indirect expenses, you will get total cost of production. To the total cost of production, you add opening stock of finished goods and closing stock of finished goods, you will get cost of goods sold. And to this cost of goods sold, when you add selling and distribution expenses, you get cost of sales. Add to that profit or deduct loss, you will get the selling price. You will get the sales. Okay. Now we have looked into work in progress, stock of work in progress. We also looked into the stock of finished goods. Now the question is, where does the raw materials go? Raw materials, the stock of raw materials. So direct materials includes the opening stock of raw materials and closing stock of raw materials. Okay, so if you're looking into the direct materials, so how do you get this first part, that is this direct materials? Okay, so the direct materials calculation is opening stock of raw materials. To that, you add purchase of raw materials during the year. You also add carriage inwards, octroi duty, customs duty, import duty, dock charges, freight charges, loading and unloading charges, everything related to raw materials. Okay, if you add those expenses and then deduct the closing stock of raw materials, you will get direct materials consumed during the year. So our main focus is to find out how much direct materials has been consumed for producing so many number of units, whatever the given number of units. Okay, so direct materials consumed, opening stock of raw materials, add purchase of raw materials, add all the direct expenses related to this purchase of raw materials, deduct closing stock, and then you have to deduct sale of material scrap in case if in the problem scrap material scrap has been sold and some income has been received out of it, some money has been received out of it, that has to be deducted. Okay, so this is how we find out the direct materials. Okay, direct materials consumed. Now, I have put this sales in, I've highlighted it with yellow, and even the sale of material scrap I've highlighted in yellow color. The reason is these two are the incomes. All other turns out to be the expenses. All others are cost, whereas sales as well as sale of material scrap, sale of finished product. Now this sales is sale of finished product. Okay, so this sale of finished product and sale of material scrap, this forms the income in the cost sheet. Coming back to the cost sheet, we also have to find out the unit cost or cost per unit. How are we going to find out the unit cost? Now, up to total cost of production, up to this point of cost sheet, okay, we find unit cost by total cost divided by units produced. Now for direct materials, okay, so if you're looking into this direct materials, first and the foremost, what we have to look into is, let me just a little bit clear this up. Give me a minute. Yeah. So direct materials is, we take the total cost of direct materials and divide by units produced. Okay. So number of units produced, you will get direct materials per unit. Same is the case with direct wages. So total direct wages cost divided by number of units produced. Same is the case in case of direct expenses. So total direct expenses divided by number of units produced. You will get direct expenses per unit. Coming to factory overheads, so total factory overheads divided by number of units produced, you will get the cost per unit, factory overheads cost per unit. Factory cost divided by number of units produced, you will get the factory cost per unit. And office and administration overheads divided by number of units produced, you will get office and administration overheads per unit. Total cost of production divided by number of units produced, you will get cost of production per unit. When it comes to cost of goods sold till the sales part, what you are going to do is total cost divided by, now you will take units sold. In this case, it is units produced, whereas here you will take units sold. So this calculation will start from the cost of goods sold. So from this calculation onwards, if you want to find out unit cost or per unit cost, you have to divide it by units sold and not units produced. If you have to find out the cost of goods sold per unit, you have to take the total cost of goods sold divided by number of units. Now you will take sold. Okay. Same is the case with selling and distribution overheads. In case of selling and distribution overheads, it is total selling and distribution overheads divided by number of units sold. Okay. Same is the case with cost of sales, profit as well. So total profits divided by number of units sold, and sales, no, total value of sales divided by number of units sold. This will give you the selling price per unit. Now there is a little deviation when we look into opening stock of finished goods and closing stock of finished goods. In this case, we divide it by opening. So opening stock of finished goods divided by opening stock of units, and closing stock of finished goods divided by closing stock of units. Okay, we don't take units produced or units sold. We look into the number of units which is there in the opening stock and number of units that are there in the closing stock. So this is how you calculate unit cost. Okay, it is mandated to show cost per unit when we are preparing cost sheet. provided we have the information relating to number of units produced during the year. So that's the gist of cost sheet. Let us move ahead. We already discussed how we calculate direct materials. Quickly we'll look into this. So valuation of stock of raw materials, you take the purchase price of raw materials. Okay, for valuing the stock of raw materials, we look into purchase price of raw materials. If you have to value the stock of work in progress, we look into the factory cost. And if you want to look into valuation of stock of finished goods, we look into the cost of production. So please bear this in mind. For stock of raw materials, we value based on purchase price of raw materials. Work in progress is valued based on the factory cost, and stock of finished goods is based on cost of production. This depends upon where are we locating this, where are we going to fix this item. Okay, so in this case, um, give me a minute. Okay, so how are we going to value this opening work in progress and closing work in progress? Based on the factory cost. Okay, so valuation of stock in progress is based on the factory cost. Now, stock of raw materials, we are looking into while calculating the direct materials. So we take the purchase price of raw materials for valuing the stock of raw materials. For valuing stock of finished goods, we look into cost of production. Okay, so for valuation of finished goods, we look into the cost of production. Okay, so this is the valuation part of the stock of either raw materials, work in progress, and finished goods. Okay, let us look into the direct expenses. So the prime cost includes direct materials and direct labor and direct expenses. So what are the uh, items that we have to take into consideration when we are calculating direct expenses? We look into special designing charges, if any, because it is related directly related to the product. As I told you, what are direct expenses? If the expense is directly attributable to the product, then it is a direct expense. As the special designing charges or special equipment that is hired specifically for this particular manufacturing this particular product, special dies, special order license fees, if any, subcontracting expenses, direct power, and royalty on production. Okay, royalty on production. So all these expenses are treated as direct expenses while calculating cost sheet. Let us quickly look into factory overheads. I told you overheads means indirect expenses. So all those indirect expenses that are related to the factory setup will be taken into consideration under factory overheads. So which are they? Indirect materials, indirect labor, rent and rates of factory, lighting and heating of factory, power, fuel and steam, repairs and maintenance, cleaning, drawing and designing expenses, cost of research and equipment, depreciation of factory building, plant, machinery, etc., loose tools written off, factory stationery, insurance of factory assets, factory or work manager's salary, welfare service expenses, excise duty, defective work, cost of rectifying defective work, drawing office salaries, coal, gas and water, technical director's fees, because this is technical means he is in the factory setup, workers training expenses, normal idle time wages, inspection cost, setup cost, service department expenses, haulage expenses, trial production expenses. All these are the costs that has to be added, and in case if there is any factory scrap that has been sold, you will deduct it. And remember, this is an income, that's the reason why you deduct it. This is just an indicative list. There might be other expenses as well, which relates to the factory setup. Um, I made a point over here, technical director's fees. So in case if it is, any other director's fees, it will come under office overheads. Okay. Coming to office and administration overheads, again overheads, so it's indirect expenses, but these are indirect expenses related to the office and administration. So rent and rates office, if it is factory, it goes to factory overheads. If it is relating to office, it will be under office and administration overheads. Salaries of office, lighting and heating related to office, printing and stationery, insurance related to office. Telephone expenses, postage and telegrams, office cleaning and maintenance expenses, legal charges, depreciation of office furniture, equipment, and buildings, audit fees, bank charges and commission, counting house salaries, directors' fees, refreshment expenses, repairs and renewals, and sundry expenses. All these are again an indicative list. It's not an exhaustive list, just an indicative list of office and administration overheads. Selling and distribution overheads includes showroom rent and rates, salesmen's salaries, commission, printing and stationery related to sales, sales office rent and rates, traveling expenses of salesmen, warehouse rent and rates, warehouse staff salaries, advertisement expenses, publicity expenses, free samples and other free gifts, salaries of packing department, carriage freight outwards or carriage on sales, sales managers' salaries, repairs of delivery van, depreciation of delivery van, sample and free gifts, bad debts, debt collection expenses, postage, exhibition and trade fair expenses, demonstration expenses, catalog printing, fees paid to brand ambassadors, and cost of tenders. So those are the expenses that come under selling and distribution overheads. Now there are certain items which are excluded while preparing cost sheet. We do not take into consideration abnormal losses under cost sheet. So abnormal losses may be, loss by natural calamity or loss by fire or theft. Okay. We also don't include appropriation of profits. That includes transfer to any of the reserves, proposed dividend, etc. We do not include expenses which are incurred post earning the profits. Once you calculate the profits, the expenses that are incurred. Now, the items that come under these are provision for taxation, income tax paid, etc. Okay. Then coming to writing off of intangible assets, we do not take into consideration intangible assets that are written off, like for example, goodwill written off, or copyrights written off, or patents written off. Those writing off of intangible assets are not taken into consideration in cost sheet. We also don't include miscellaneous expenditures which are written off, like for example, preliminary expenses written off, or discount on issue of shares, or discount on issue of debentures, underwriting commission. Such type of miscellaneous expenditures are not taken into consideration under cost sheet. We also don't take expenses which are not related to the product. Okay, all those expenses that are not related to the product will not be considered in cost sheet. And then financial expenses and losses are also not included, like for example, interest on loans or interest on debentures, provision for bad debts, loss on sale of fixed assets or discount allowed, fines, penalties, damages, legal expenses for any of the criminal suit. All these are not taken into consideration under cost sheet. Now sale of material scrap, and sale of factory scrap. Okay, all these three items are incomes. These are the only three incomes that appear in the cost sheet. All other things are costs. That's all in this video, students. Hope you all had a pleasant learning experience. Please don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit that like button and share it with your friends. See you all in the next video. Thank you.